time to Thomas Beaton for technical questions. So again, you have 5 minutes. We'll start when you start speaking, and as I said, there may be questions afterwards.
My name is Alan Brown. I'm representing Cheshire East Council as the applicant. I'm a civil engineer with 40 years experience in dam and safety engineering, and I've been a Reservoir Panel Engineer since 2001. The proposed works are to bring the dam up to current reservoir safety standards and comprise infilling low spots along the crest, so that in extreme floods the water is spread out over the whole length of the dam, rather than concentrating in the current low spots and eroding the dam. This work will require removing trees on the upstream half of the dam crest, so a new curved crest marker at a consistent level has a firm foundation and water will not leak underneath. Trees will be retained on the downstream half of the dam crest, except in 2 40-metre lengths, where clearings are required to provide a focused overgrowth resilience in extreme flooding away from existing residential properties. Overall, around 80% of the overall length of the affected dam crest at 480 metres would retain trees on the downstream half. An independent review by a panel engineer appointed by Poynton Town Council concluded that the option proposed is proportionate and has less impact in terms of tree loss than potential alternatives. The work has to be done because Poynton Pool is classified as a high-risk reservoir under the provisions of the Reservoirs Act, and Cheshire East Council as the landowner has statutory duties in accordance with the Act to protect the public downstream. The duties include the need for regular inspection and safety reviews by suitable panel engineers. Following this routine safety review in 2016, the inspecting engineer required a flood study to assess the resilience of the depth of flooding. The subsequent flood study in 2019 showed that the resilience of the existing dam to extreme floods does not meet the current institution civil engineer standards. And this is the reason for this planning application was made. If the dam failed and released the stored water, the Environment Agency reservoir flood analysis shows that around 3,500 people are at risk from flooding downstream, including a significant risk to life as well as property damage of around £80 million. Should the council choose not to act on this advice, their appointed supervising panel engineer would serve formal notice from the council to require an early section 10 review. This is likely to require mandatory updates to Spillway along similar lines to the current proposals, if not probably more onerous, and would include a fixed deadline with which to complete the works. The council would then be at risk of enforcement action from the Environment Agency as a reservoir safety regulator if the mandation works were not undertaken. The loss of some trees from the dam crest due to the works is an unfortunate consequence. Environment Agency guidance states that no trees should be located on embankments which retain reservoirs. However, the proposed application adopts a risk-based approach to save trees where possible, rather than adopting the full engineering standard, where all trees would be removed to accommodate the major raising of the whole crest. Overall, within the red line boundary, it's estimated there are approximately 300 trees. The proposed works will retain around 80% of these. It's noted that the British Standard recommends that woodlands are surveyed as a cohesive group, with individual trees identified if required. Further details will be provided at the request of the tree officer regarding the area of spillway clearance and the number of trees across stems about 75 millimetre diameter. In terms of national biodiversity, again, these requirements are met by planting and maintaining over 1,500 new trees on council-owned land in Woodford, which follows local plan policy ENP6, trees, hedgerows and woodland implementation. Looking at the alternatives that have been considered, these are summarised in the summary options report and are in 3 groups. Firstly, increasing the size of the concrete spillway would not in itself meet reservoir safety standards, but would also require the embankment to be raised substantially or make it resilient to overflow. Secondly, in theory, the normal water level could be lowered by over 1 metre, so the pond was smaller, but this would permanently expose the side of the reservoir and have a major impact on the amenity of the park and was rejected. Thirdly, in terms of the works being back down embankment to increase resilience to overflow, none of the alternative options suggested by us would achieve the 2 key requirements of the overflow in extreme floods is spread out evenly over the whole 400 metre length, and the crest is resilient to overflow. In conclusion, it's appreciated that works will unfortunately have an impact on the amenity environment of Poynton Pool, However, there are no realistic options for tree planting in the locality. The planning officer's report recommends acceptance of the planning application. So we urge councillors to give consent to this application in the interest of maintaining reservoir safety, compliance with the Council with the Reservoirs Act, and reducing risk to those living downstream.
Okay, thank you. So, I don't know if Mr. Cleveland wants to bring a chair up there.
Any tree questions?
Yes.
To my colleague.
Yeah, can you just confirm what Mr. Cleveland's expertise is in?
I've been involved in the project with the other local consultants to trade.
Okay. Thank you. So, questions? Councillor Ken Edwards and Councillor Gardner.
Thank you for that presentation. I've got one specific question and then just a general one, I suppose. The first question is, one of the key issues seems to be the actual volume of water in the reservoir. Would you please comment on the information we've heard that apparently people could walk across it, and it's Poynton pool, swimming pool has got greater depth and so on. Because it does seem to me that the amount of water in the reservoir is a significant issue. And then we've had a considerable amount of detailed technical information given to us, plus two alternative proposals. Do you feel able, I mean, I realise that you've only just perhaps heard some of this, although I imagine you have considered much of it. Could you comment for us, please, on whether you think that any of the information, technical information you received, if you like, can I say, would be worth reconsidering, forcing us to defer this proposal that we have to do?
Okay. In terms of the reservoir volume, it's whatever the volume is, the surface area is such that it's definitely on the Reservoirs Act. In terms of the consequences downstream, the key parameter is not the volume because that governs how fast it flows. I've had a dialogue with the Environment Agency because they've had a request to confirm the volumes. I've done a rough check and I advise that the volumes are staying. It is based on the information we've got. It could be out, but it's not going to change the consequence of failure by more than a few percent. So I don't consider, in terms of risk to people downstream, the number of people in the area flooded and property damage, that it would have a material effect. In terms of your second question, we've responded to the planning officer on the two options. Both options skirt around the issue of crest resilient flow. Just say we'll put a bit of clay between the trees, and I don't think that meets the objectives of a level crest to within 6 millimetres, which is why we've got the concrete plus or minus quarter inch in imperial units, which is why we've gone for the curve, because we can get that more precisely and make sure any overflow in very extreme floods is spread out, and we put clay to increase the resistance to overflow. So I don't believe, and that was the option, we did consider that option originally, it was option 2, and we said the cost was, if you were doing the full engineering standard, you would do something like that, but you would also need to raise the crest. And we said at the time in the initial options that the cost was disproportionate, and we went for the lesser option of making the crest level. So in these very extreme events, the water spread out, and it's not going to fail the dam.
Thank you.
Okay. So Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Brooks.
I'm afraid I've got 7 questions. You've answered the question about the water. You made reference to the book that you need to go by in terms of managing reservoirs. Is that a book which sets out that if a reservoir is such a size you can do certain works, if the reservoirs are going to do different works, or is it one size fits all? That's the first question.
So the Reservoirs Act system, the legislation requires a process of qualified people appointed by DEFRA with advice from the Institute of Civil Engineers, and they use their judgment, and then DEFRA issue guides to get consistency. So the book, the guide to floods and reservoir safety, has 4 options: a dam that would kill hundreds of people, a dam that would kill few people, which is where the previous inspecting engineer and myself agreed that that's where it sits. C wouldn't kill anyone, and D, no one would notice apart from the few sheep. So that, and your design flood vary and the safety check flood vary with those. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all. If Cheshire East or some of the farmer built a housing estate immediately downstream of the dam, it would become category A and the spillway would have to be. But where we are at the moment, with the current situation downstream, it's category B, and we've selected the 2 floods for that category.
So the categorisation is determined by the potential deaths that might be caused by breach, not by the...
It's a matter of judgment.
Not by the size of the dam.
Correct, absolutely. There's nothing to do with the size of the dam, it's about the consequences.
Okay, that's the first question.
And it's a judgment by the planning
So
engineer.
you've effectively answered my second question, so I'm asking for category. To categorically say, if we were to refuse this application today, there is a high risk that somebody would die.
Yes, I mean, because the topic...
Are they rude? Is there a guy in the room? Like you said,
If members of the public can refrain from speaking, please, when the question is on.
One of the criticisms of Wayne Bridge was the slow response by the Canal River Trust. And the Barnforth inquiry said that a matter of interest to safety is a statute of pass whether it's MOT. You can continue to drive the roads and you probably won't kill anyone. But if you've got defective brakes, the chance of you killing someone is higher. So it's the same with the reservoir. The reservoir has failed its MOT. It's got safety works, that's what mandatory works are, and they should be done as soon as reasonably practicable. So if the risk at the moment of those 3,500 people is elevated above what the institution of civil engineers would accept as residual risk, and the longer you defer any decision, the longer that population is exposed to that risk. You're driving around with a car that's failed its MOT.
So you're saying that 3,500 people are at risk if this work isn't done?
They're at risk. There are 3,500 at risk, full stop. What we're saying is that the likelihood at the moment is higher than meets standards in this institution of civil engineers. And the risk will never be zero unless you remove the dam. But to do this work will reduce the likelihood and therefore reduce the risk.
So reduce it, right, okay. If I now, you're saying that you and the previous engineer agreed that the situation was category B.
Correct.
What has happened between that engineer undertaking, their you undertaking now, that has brought us to where we are now, having to do these rather extreme works?
He made a recommendation in the interest of safety to check the spillway because he's a third-party auditor of what he's presented with by the council. He felt that there wasn't evidence that it met good standards in respect of spillway capacity and recommended a study. His report, there are places in the report where he asked for the undergrowth to be cleared, which hasn't been done, but that's a detail. The key is he made it mandatory, failed its MOT in the spillway, or it needs a study. The study has shown it's inadequate and therefore needs improving, and that's what's changed.
And finally, I, in my professional career, have regular encounters with engineers, and I knew that they were very black and white to people in terms of it's this or it's this, we don't have any grey. The solution that's being presented here, the 2 42-metre stretches, is there no way that an alternative solution that achieves what you want to achieve in terms of safety can be achieved without just going to those extremes? Or is it just a case of, well, this is the max optimum that we need, so we're going to go with the optimum? Let's have an alternate solution where actually we will be okay with doing it.
in my opinion, they're necessary. I would say there's some grey here. We've chosen not to adopt the full engineering standard. So if the dam is re-inspected, you might have to build option 2 plus raise the crest half a metre, which would mean carrying the full crest. And I'm conscious some of the younger panel engineers who've been on the panel at the moment have been fairly more rigorous than some of our. So there is inconsistency. There is a risk to Cheshire if you went for a new inspection that you would have to do a lot more. It's the area of grey. We in the applicant's engineers, because I'm trying to represent Cheshire, have adopted a risk-based approach to try and find something that's proportionate to the environment, the local amenities, but also to people downstream, and find a balance between the two.
Thank you very much.
So there is grey. Panel engineer is not consistent, which is why I use guides to try and make it better.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brooks and then Councillor Cloud.
I have 3 questions, if I may, Chair. The first question is, you stated there is a significant risk to life. The actual report says that at the most it would be up to 2 people killed in a very unlikely event. I mean, in terms of the risk, would you say there's more chance of someone being killed actually during the construction of this site? Or, I mean, you say on Cheshire Road, sort of, I think 30 people are killed every year on the road, so I'm just kind of a little bit confused that it seems though to be overstated the risk, and I would have liked to have seen a health impact assessment, and because in terms of mental health, well-being, on the immunity of the people in Poynton, I think we should have seen that. The second, do you want to answer that question first and then go to...
Easy to do one at a time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, go on, yeah.
I think the design standard, I mean, so what would you say is the acceptable chance of killing someone downstream because of that failure?
Well, I think you were answering the question.
Well, I'm trying to lead. So the design standard is 1 in 10,000 per year, and that's simplistically the chance of dam failing in a flood, which simplistically is a chance of killing someone downstream. So at the moment, there is a best estimate was 1 in 200 chance per year. So the question is, what do you think, what is a reasonable chance of, what's a tolerable risk of killing someone downstream? Now, if you get in your own car, it's up to you. That people die on the roads, that there are other things, gas explosion. But reservoir safety, the Institution of Civil Engineers has set design standards, and the simplest way of considering them is that the safety check is a flood that will not fail the dam and is therefore, it's just about, it's near the tipping point. So that's effectively the annual chance of killing someone downstream. And so to me, it's not overstated. I would be very uncomfortable with saying 1 in 200. The chance of you dying tomorrow because my actions and my property next door is 1 in 2. I don't think that's acceptable, and that's why the issues civil engineers have set out the standards, and they're higher where there's more people at risk.
Okay, same question.
Yeah, I think in the planning report, there's sort of a disappointment expressed that there's no mitigation in terms of the increased flooding of the properties on Anglesey Drive. So I'd like to ask why was it not considered possible to provide some mitigation, because you're actually increasing the chances of flood and potentially them dying as a risk of flooding.
I think there's 2 points there. Firstly, we're actually restoring the level. We're not raising the dam. We're restoring those spots to the level when it was built 250 years ago, because the level we're putting in is the same as the level up the car park, which is the same as the regional level. So we're making good settlement. So we're restoring it to where, that's clearly that's debatable, but we're not trying to raise it. We're trying to make it level, but we've chosen the level that's about the top of the existing bank, which is probably where it was originally. So we're just making good settlements over decades or centuries or whatever. The second point is those houses already have their gardens flooded.
No, they haven't.
No, it's incorrect.
Incorrect.
Members of the public can refrain, please. We've got some more questions to be asked.
The progress assessment suggests that they're already at risk, and the increase in flood risk is their gardens are this much deeper, which, because they're quite steep, is about this depth in garden increase, and they're still a long way below the houses. So to me, two key issues were risk, and then the third point is that balancing that risk of your garden 2 metres of your garden being flooded against the risk of 3,500 people downstream seems to me not an unreasonable compromise, particularly if we say actually we're just restoring it to where the dam should have been because it's settled over time.
Okay, final question.
Yeah, in terms of the application, was there any assessment in terms of the impact on carbon emissions, in terms of the construction and the loss of trees? Thanks.
Not on carbon, no.
Okay, so now Councillor Clowes, will there be Councillor Smitham?
Thank you. You've answered a couple of the questions I had. We've heard a lot about tree removal and an argument presented that removing trees may actually destabilise the structure of the dam further. At the back of my mind, though, is that we remove some trees, we still want to remove the stumps as well. So I'm just, what the first question is, it might be you, sir, what is the balance between actually removing trees and their stumps, and that leaving trees and having potential seepage around the root systems? So that's the first question.
So the first question is, we would normally aim to move roots down to about 50 mil, but these smaller ones, because it becomes impractical with smaller ones. And the aim of the detail that was shown on the planning drawing is we're removing topsoil and roots over a 4 metre width of about 10 metre crest, so it's the upstream third or half, whatever you vary. So that the clay that we're putting in to make it resilient to overflow is in contact with what the dam was built of. Whereas if you left in the roots and the topsoil, there is a potential seepage path along the roots and the topsoil. So the drawing shows we're removing on the width. So we originally only were going to go for the curve, but to get a betterment, we went for a 2-metre path to improve the path. So that's not reservoir safety, but that was to, from a council point of view, to improve, to gain some amenity. So under the 4 metre width, we're removing the tree, the organic material and roots down to 50 mil, so that we can get the structure structurally sound and tied into the dam. Downstream of that, we're leaving the trees, other than these 2 40-metre clearings.
Okay.
So 80% of the trees will remain at a broad brush level.
That's what it says in the
My
report.
second question is in relation to spillways themselves. We've heard various options proposed that maybe we lower the level of the pool and actually reduce the current spillway that we saw on the photographs, which appears to have been doing a good job up until now for the last 250 years. So I want to just understand the rationale for not either lowering the level and lowering the level of the spillway, or indeed putting in another one of those culverted spillways further down. And then the other question is, if that's not possible, what is the engineering criteria that requires us to have 2 40-metre spillways? What is like the magic criteria around that? I do understand the rationale for levelling off everything, where there's been erosion or a bit of subsidence and settling over 250 years. I understand bringing it all up to the same level. But what I do, having looked at the site, I couldn't quite understand what the necessity was of these two incredibly wide spillways, and what actual difference it can make in the
standards for a category B dam, you need 600 on freeboard plus the height of the flood rise in a design flood. And that, we're way below that at the moment. So you could lower the dam and build a new spillway to get that sort of metre freeboard instead of 300. But we felt that lowering, exposing the whole perimeter of the lake, you know, if you lower it a metre, say, and it's 1 in 3, that it's 4 or 5 metres slope all the way around, you've got to decide how you revegetate it because it's going to stay permanently low. So we rejected that. We felt that was and I think the cost would be similar. So the issue is that anything you do, as I said in my presentation, anything you do to the concrete spillway will not meet this freeboard requirement, full engineering standard, unless you do a major raising of the crest. The proposal in the planning application is a compromise solution where we go risk-based, and by spreading the water out, we don't have to meet, we're not, so there is a risk to Cheshire East that every 10 years you're going to re-inspect it. And if a future inspecting engineer, 30, 40, 50 years' time, you know, if it changes their mind or the standards get higher, you've got to meet the standards current at that time. So what we're proposing now is a compromise, which in my opinion, professional opinion, is a reasonable minimum to meet standards, and I will endeavour to make a case for it in the sign-off document so the next inspecting engineer says, well, okay, I accept it, there's no more works. In terms of your question about 40 metres, I don't, again, that's a judgment that I don't accept. That I'm concerned because we're talking about when we raised it, we've got that depth of water over 480 metres, and the moment the woodland is unmanaged, it's not parkland, which is what the last inspecting engineer asked for it to be, but I think there would be opposition to turning it into parkland. So the compromise is to provide some preferential flow routes away from the houses where if water backs up because of undergrowth and leaflets, because you're only talking surface water flow, it's got 2 places which are cutter's grass once a year or whatever, where the water can escape without building up. And I think the fundamental question is, you're not realising the risk you're at. If you try and get an independent review, and that's why if you read the report of Poynton Council Commission, he implied there wasn't enough work done, he would have done more. If you read between the lines, that's what he said. So I think what we're proposing is a minimum. If you want to try and get independent, fine. I think you'll end up doing a lot more than you might end up doing the whole thing. Because I know we have discussions between panel engineers. I know what some of the other ones do. I can't see them, but they.
So if I may come back to you on those points. So in terms of, I just want to understand the mechanics, the velocity mechanics, if I can. So what we're saying is that if at the point of failure, if the bank was...
Well, we can avoid that.
Well, I appreciate that. But at that point of failure, the risk in terms of potential deaths, damage to property and so forth is based not on the amount of the volume of water in the pond, but the pool rather, but actually the velocity at the point of rupture of the bank.
No, I didn't say that. The peak breach
Sorry,
discharge.
you said it. You did. It was said.
That's not correct. The peak breach discharge, the hydrograph of release of the reservoir, depends on the height of the dam at the point it breaches and the volume that's released and how fast it erodes. And
You don't know the volume, so that.
No, if you can desist, please.
so that's the hydrograph. That flow building up to a peak and then falling off is rooted in a 2D model in the inundation, and it's released into a valley with a floodplain and things, and that flood wave travels downstream. The environmental reservoir flood maps count the number of houses that would be flooded by that wave moving down the valley. It's not the fatality or the chance of death at each point where someone's in the model depends on the depth and velocity at that point down the valley. Nothing to do with the dam. By that point, the dam is about releasing a wave of water, and that wave of water, as it travels down the valley, as it attenuates, it spreads out, and it's the impact of that wave is the consequence to the public downstream. And I mean, again, you can always do more calculations. It's only it's a category B dam. The wave, all the environment agencies are worried about is the impact on the houses. I think we've suggested Cheshire East, their emergency planning should think about where they're going to put the 3,500 people. You need a lot of rest centres. You think the number of people from the back way to the top, 1,500. How many rest centres do you need? If the dam has got a serious problem, looks like it's going to fail, you end up evacuating downstream. That's happening. Where is Cheshire East going to put that 3,500 people? And the other thing is, it doesn't include critical infrastructure. Because that's restricted because of security concerns, the EA don't include that in their map. So knocking out power substations and national gas supplies.
Can I ask members of the public to desist, please, so that members here can hear the answer to the question?
When Ali had a serious incident and it lost half its spillway, they shut the M1, but they said actually the dam failure wouldn't have done the damage. It was a national gas main 200 metres downstream would be much. That would have been far more loss of life than the dam failure. So these are facts. I made an engineer statement. There isn't a black and white rule. It's not a recipe rule. It's trying to weigh these different factors together. The consequences, we know the limitations, which there always are in any analysis, the consequence assessment. You know, the impact on the dam and the people there, the likelihood of failure of the dam, and so the decision or the proposal, the planning application is my judgment as to what's appropriate level to try and balance the adverse impact on the dam, the community living upstream of the dam, and the people downstream. And it takes into account all these different factors, and it's therefore not a black and white. It's a number of cards. I'm trying to work out which ones you can put more weight on. Believe more.
Yeah, I think you need to vote on that. Okay. So I've got.
Mr. Chairman, this is a point of order. We have a member of the public who's recording this on their phone. I'm not convinced that is actually allowed.
Yeah, it is.
Ask officers to comment, please.
I think we did say at the start, Councillor Gardner, that it was being recorded.
No, we're recording. I understand that.
No, I did say that a member of the public was.
Oh, sorry, I misheard you. I assumed well. Okay, I apologise for that. Getting raised to the point. I was concerned that the gentleman was being subject to recording.
Can I just point out, you might want to take advice from the security service because some of the information is redacted when it's issued to the public. So it might be better to me to be recorded by the council, because you can then take advice from the security service whether, if I'm quoting 3,500 people, whether that should be redacted.
Take advice from the officers on that one.
Okay, that's fine. Just,
Yeah, the information is in the public report.
Yeah.
So if we can make some progress there. I've got Councillor Spillway and then Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned about a formal notice, a Section 10 review, and possible enforcement by the Environment Agency. Can you just elaborate? Have I got that correct? Can you elaborate, please?
at the moment, the last Section 10, it was mandated to do a flood study, but he didn't say you had to do anything about it. I issued a certificate saying there was a flood study and that the dam needed to be made safer. If that was not done within 3 years, I advised that the supervising engineer should issue a notice under section 12 that basically the supervising engineer can require the undertaker, the Cheshire East, to carry out an inspection, and that is non-negotiable. And he's postponed it once or twice, but he's expecting I guess, consent. If consent's not given, he would have to take a view, it's not me, it's another company, whether he would make it mandatory to have an inspection. As soon as you have an inspection, that will then has the power to make more mandatory recommendations, whatever the individual doing the inspection thinks, with fixed dates. And if you don't meet those dates, the Environment Agency will take enforcement action. And Tony Deacon said to me, if I think the dam's unsafe, he's happy to use his emergency powers to come into the lake.
Okay, so Councillor Jackson?
Thank you. Who's responsible for keeping the overflow that's already there clear? Because, you know, the maintenance around there, that's what it needs, maintenance. I looked at the overflow and it was all bogged up. And surely that should be kept clear to keep the water flowing.
That's a matter for Cheshire East.
Well, I was just asking you if you knew who it was, and do you take that into
I would do, my role is to implement the mandatory measures in the last inspection, not to do a new inspection or to look at other issues. It's purely, every 10 years you start again and you do a full audit, and that next inspection may ask for it to be changed, a different screen, braking, all sorts of things. But that's not my remit, it's purely to implement the mandatory measures from the 2016 inspection.
And would it not be more sensible to put willow whips around the side of the dam to make it more secure, or is that not a question for you?
I don't think that's a question for me. That's more about operation and maintenance of the reservoir, whereas the planning application is for structural modifications to reduce the likelihood of failure and the impact on those downstream and bring the reservoir up to modern reservoir settings.
If you raise the size of the pool, that would stop it further flowing, surely.
We're not raising this pool.
I know, I'm not.
We're restoring the settlement and making it level.
I said the size of the pool, make it more secure with willow whips and that kind of thing.
Well, I think perhaps this would be a question Councillor Jackson for the officers.
I'm going to leave the tree on as well. Okay, I'll try somebody else.
Okay, so nobody else, Mrs. Last chance to attend the present, Mr. Brown. Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown, for your answers. So now, Mr. Wakefield, do you have anything to respond to what we've heard in that lengthy public speaking?
I don't actually do, Chair. I think maybe the queries that were raised and then I'll ask some questions around as well. I'll leave it for now and see the questions.
Yeah, okay. Members, any questions for officers? Councillor Brooks?
In the report, saw something about the risk to damage of the existing spillway through the construction of this scheme. Is that right?
Sorry.
Councillor Jackson, could you turn your microphone off, please?
Yes, it was referred to. I think it's simply by operating machinery within proximity of the culvert and the existing spillway. It just highlighted this potential issue, not that there's a particular risk involved, because obviously careful operating procedures would presumably be employed, but that was the only reference from the report to any potential damage to the spillway. It's just should an accident happen during construction of that kind of In terms of the responsibility for the clearance, I can't give you it is the responsibility of Cheshire East Council as the undertakers and the reservoir owners, if you like. So it's Cheshire East responsibility. That's as much as I can say on that particular point of clearing the spillway. In terms of Willowwicks, I mean, the point of the proposal is that it provides this resilience by installing a concrete curb along the crest for this full 500 metre length. And it's that resilience that's needed within that concrete curb. I think, you know, it's installed to within sort of plus or minus 6 millimetres, so it's a very specific position that can be achieved, and it can be secured in that location. I think things such as Willowwicks or, you know, building the embankment with additional soil doesn't meet those engineering standards that are needed to achieve the solution that's sought. And in terms of mitigation planting, yeah, the planting is some distance away in Woodford. It's in stock waters. You know, we've set that out in the report, and yeah, it doesn't address. And again, it's clearly set out in the report. That doesn't address the sort of visual loss that's going to be experienced within the local area. The applicants have investigated other sites. You know, I've asked them about other sites, but there's no other local sites available for replacement planting.
Well, I would have thought you could have planted them along the side of the road, on the opposite side of the road, to mitigate and take them down on that side of the road.
Okay, this is a statement, I think, rather than a question.
Yeah, it is a statement, and I hope it takes
I know
on board.
Danny can come back to that in the debate, possibly very shortly. Any other questions to officers? No? Okay, so we will now move to debate the item. I think there are a number of, we've got 2 or 3 members who aren't that far away, but I think Councillor Ken Edwards has volunteered to start the debate, if I can invite him to.
Thank you, Chair. It is, in a sense, a privilege to be dealing with such a difficult and complex matter, and this balance between amenity and safety that has been mentioned is obviously a crucial element, and also the fact that Poynton Pool, as we can see the evidence here today, is an extremely, first of all, aesthetically pleasant area. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and it's a pleasant area that is deeply in the, if you like, the psychic heart of the community in terms of the protection that we should be attempting to ensure it has. Now, having said that, when I read the report, I look at sort of 3 paragraphs, 21, 24 and 26. And I would just like to refer to them. I'm sure everyone, you know, they've jumped out at everyone, but this is where I started. The key findings of the S10 inspection, which I do note is in August 2016, and we are now attempting to provide a solution to the results of that inspection in 2023. So it's not as though there hasn't been a considerable time in which we've considered this. And what it tells us is that the findings were an updated flood study, which I believe was done in 2019, and I can be corrected if that's not the case, to assess the risk of embankment overtopping. And then, arising from flood surcharge and concurrent wave action, and it was a very interesting description of Mr. Brown's, I think, in some detail, how that flood surcharge and concurrent wave action, if it occurs, has a whole variety of impacts on the environment, including, of course, the risk of the risk to life. And as a result, an emergency drawdown plan is required, and I emphasize that emergency because I do reflect on the time that has passed since this particular inspection was carried out. So that's the first paragraph that jumped out to me. next one is on page 24 at the bottom. The Environment Agency reservoir flood mapping carried out in 2019, which is apparently if you like, the plan of that drawdown, shows that the consequence of failure at Poynton Reservoir in a flood is likely to lead to flooding affecting around 3,500 people and is likely to lead to loss of around 2 lives and cause 79 million pounds of property damage. And I'm mindful as a strategic planning committee, we are responsible for taking decisions that have an impact in the long term. So there's that paragraph. And finally, the paragraph on 26. Cheshire East Council, as the undertaker or owner of the reservoir, in other words, the responsibility clearly comes back to us, and that responsibility for the council as a whole sits with us today, is obliged to carry out necessary improvements against extreme flooding and implement these by the end of 2023. And we are already in 2024 to avoid enforcement action by the Environment Agency. And the agent for the applicant, Mr. Brown, has set out the, if you like, the legal consequences of not managing the situation. Now, there is therefore, it seems to me, a very clear obligation to come to a decision on how this is going to be done. And it's been described as an emergency situation. So I feel, as a member of the Strategic Planning Committee, pressure of time to certainly to consider this, and therefore I must say I feel that there is a weight on us to consider very, very carefully any suggestions for deferral or indeed rejection. Now, we have heard a considerable amount of detailed technical information, which obviously certainly I and I think the planning officers have said that it's very difficult for them to make judgments about. But we've also heard from Mr. Brown what I would regard as a pretty sort of solid defence of the proposal here. The proposal is to, as I understand it, to strengthen the top of the dam and to equalise it, so pressure of water won't be able to, if you like, pick out one area at the top and then concentrate on that and flood down into the valley. And it seems that the measures that have been put in there have been considered in detail. They've been considered against more extreme and costly measures, which of course is a very great concern to us. Also, there has been, I think, over the time to consider the representations that have been made by the public in great volume. There's no doubt about that, and great expense as well to the local community. And we have to acknowledge that. But I think there has been a reduction in some of the work necessary to reduce the environmental impact. And there will be an environmental impact. The word brutal has been mentioned several times. However, it's a balance. And I have to say, the legal responsibilities that we have to ensure that that dam is safe, not only safe for the next 10 minutes, but for the longest time possible, so that future inspections don't ask us to go back and actually do more work. So I am at the moment, I have to say, minded to support this application, but I do want to hear the detailed considerations that will be given by my councillor colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your every contribution, Councillor Evers. I do appreciate you may want to come back. Councillor Gardner.
I too recognise the legal responsibilities of Cheshire East Council to ensure that perturbed to understand why somebody else who is technically qualified to advise was very good at saying that he wasn't going to criticise anybody else's report when he felt there was a need for some of the data to be reviewed. And I think it would be irresponsible of us to just approve today when we clearly have been presented with conflicting arguments. If we were being presented with a scheme by any other party that was so contrary to so many of our policies, we would not be recommending it for approval. This council is effectively being bullied by the Water Authority. Let's be honest, they've not got exactly the best press recently, into doing something which we might all recognise is necessary, but without engaging with counterpoints and considering a different way. I'm not convinced today there isn't a different way, and I'm fully aware, having worked with engineers for most of my working life as a planner, that they do have a rather black and white approach, even if our agent is saying that they apply to grey in this instance. And I do not feel comfortable in supporting the recommendation. However, mindful of our responsibilities as a corporate body as opposed to as this board, I'm happy to recommend that we defer the item to facilitate further investigation, engaging with all parties, particularly the Friends of Poynton Pool's technical advisors. I appreciate that a lot of the residents might want to be involved, but unfortunately we have to separate emotion from fact. And I think if we're dealing with a technical person, everybody in the room will be dealing with facts. I think it's important that we do have the correct data and that data is provided and analysed, and only when that data has been provided and analysed, either this application will be withdrawn because it will not be a project going forward, or alternatively it will come back to us with all of those questions that have been raised today answered. And in those circumstances, I might be minded to support the desecration of the woody areas that are proposed by today. But my recommendation is we should defer for those reasons.
Councillor Clarence?
We have in front of us an application today that technically is acceptable to the Cheshire East Council officers, and that is recommended for approval for the reasons that we have heard at length and which are justifiable and sound reasons. I do have a duty of responsibility as the council to ensure the future safety of residents in relation to large bodies of water, reservoirs in this case. However, I do feel somewhat anxious and perturbed that there is such variance in the data that's been produced today with the options, and I feel that we have a duty of responsibility also to residents of Poynton to make sure that we have looked at that data, and if that means getting the Environment Agency to do another depth analysis, which has been suggested is already in motion, then we should wait for that. It may not make any difference to the fact that the volume of water is still going to be sufficiently high that we need to take action under the legislation. I think it's been made quite clear that that in fact is the case. Nonetheless, it may have an impact on the nature of the solutions. And to be quite honest, if that means that we need to go away and look at this, if only to come back and say to the residents of Poynton Hall, around Poynton Hall, that actually your data has been looked at and unfortunately it still is found wanting, then so be it. But at least then it's open and transparent and the arguments are clearly stated and outlined. From my own perspective, I would be interested in looking at some of those options in a little bit more detail. I appreciate that if we lower the level of the pool, we will be left with exposed banks. But there are some amazing engineering solutions around at the moment. I've been looking at vegetated retention walls for riverbanks and reservoirs of this kind in relation to other projects in the south of the borough. So I think there's an awful lot still to be done before we make a definitive decision, and I would be very uncomfortable simply to pass this on today because it is technically acceptable when actually we need to ask ourselves a different question. It's not, is it a correct decision? We have to ask ourselves, is it the right decision? So consequently, I'm happy to support the proposal that we defer this, and that I would ask that officers prioritise this so we can bring those results back at pace, and so not to lose any more time. And I don't want to go forward to a Section 10 review any more than anyone else, because I think our Cheshire East advisor is quite right. We don't want the Environment Agency taking this out of our hands. Similarly, we need to make sure that it is the right decision.
I'm sure we'll all be keen to hear more about vegetated retention walls in due course. That's something very exciting. So I've got Councillor Braithwaite and then Councillor Smitham.
Thank you, Chair. I am very conflicted at the moment. I'm conscious of the safety aspects, but I'm concerned that the recommendations may be based on flawed data, particularly around the volume of water in the reservoir. So I'm listening for its interest.
Okay, so Councillor Smitham.
Thank you. It's a very difficult one. I haven't seen one like this for a long time. Do the recommendations today preclude us from doing more work later? That's my question, which is a bit too late to ask actually. So my ward has seen much more flooding over recent years, so I think something's really needed in this area. Obviously, the reports that had to be complied with, I think it was, it's really important stuff. It's causing a great deal of conflict and difficulty and concern for local people. In an ideal world, we would make a permanent job of this, but for the moment, I think we should be concerned with the safety aspect that's been highlighted, and perhaps take on work in future to enhance the site more at a later date. Presumably we won't be precluded taking on more work if we approve this today. So I just don't want to precipitate a difficult situation into a worse place than it already is in. So if the option to improve, we can go back and look at things later. So I'm not keen. I would like to approve this at the moment in order to make things safe and to have the future option of doing more later.
Okay, so we have had a thorough move by Councillor Garden, seconded by Councillor Clowes. I want to allow everybody who hasn't spoken yet to speak, and I've got Councillor Seddon, Councillor Brooks and Councillor Jackson. I know that has made a very brief contribution at the moment at this time. I mean, I wondered if by not going with the recommendation today, are we kicking the can down the road so that those who are living in Poynton in 40 years' time later this century may have more brutal intervention than we are facing here. But there is clearly inconsistencies here, which I think we would, you know, the councillors deciding on this do need to know that the technical data in front of them is the correct data, or there is black and white, as Councillor Gardner said. We want to know that the information is the correct information that we've got in front of us. And there are numerous council policies that this will be contrary to. So that's where I would stand personally. Councillor 7.
Yes, thank you. So my approach to this is that I don't think that we should defer. I think we aren't just kicking the can down the road. I think we've got enough information to make a decision. And I don't think the volume of water, it's not the depth of the pool, it's thinking about extreme storms, it's thinking about increased rainfall in the future with climate change. So I think we do need to do something. Everybody is agreeing that we need to do something. So I think if you delay, the costs are going to increase even more just with inflation. So I think we have to make a decision today. In terms of, I see the logic of the design. I like the fact that it's going to be reinforced to get a constant height, so you've got even overflow of water. I think you do need to remove those trees. I accept that design so that the water flows in a direction to reduce the overall risk of flooding properties and so on. You want an even, slow flow. We want this to be a 100-year design, which I think the engineers have done. And as a council, we do have a statutory duty to protect the public. I think it's not a case of if, it's a case of when. We don't do anything. And we all know that climate change is happening. Winters are going to get warmer and wetter. I do appreciate that it is a beautiful area, but trees can be planted elsewhere to counteract the loss of trees.
Wow.
Okay, I'll step the public, so keep quiet, please. We are in the middle of a debate here, and we all want to hear what's being said.
I am passionate about trees myself. I am, yes. I plant trees. I am part of Trees for Congleton group. I plant trees regularly, and I'm passionate about this, but we are a society, we have to have infrastructure that works for these extreme weather events. And trees do grow, they do have a lifespan, and they can be planted elsewhere. So, you know, in terms of the gaps, the 40-metre gaps, you've got 800-metre length, so I can see quite clearly that it's someone's taken 10%, they've taken 80 metres into two different sections, which appears quite logical to me that would be a sensible way of getting that water overflow controlled. So I'm agreeing, I would like to support and approve this motion, this proposal. Thank you.
We do already have something else on the table at the moment, which we will be voting on in due course. I want to just remind Councillor, or as I said, Councillor Gardner, that you've moved the deferral for further investigation. We'll be asking you to remind us what you wanted on the further investigation before we move to the vote. I've got Councillor Brooks and then Councillor Jackson and then Councillor Edwards. Oh, I did say Councillor Edwards could come back at some point, so I will take at some point Councillor Edwards. Councillor Brooks.
Yeah, I can't. Bit of feedback there. I can't support this application. It's contrary to numerous policies. The actual report from the officers is damning in terms of the actual impact and the way that it's not in any way, shape or form compliant with any of our policies. So I'm not actually convinced at all by what I've heard today in terms of the risk. I think it's that in the worst case, 2 people would be lose their lives from that. Not to discount the value of those 2 lives, but I think, you know, every year 50 people die in construction projects in their sort of daily hoping actually it would actually demonstrate what the impacts on flooding of those 3,500 people will be. We haven't got that information, and I just, and as Councillor Gardner said, if it had been another applicant, we wouldn't be approving this, and I think in terms of we need to do better as a council because planting trees and in Woodford that aren't actually accessible to the public is no compensation at all. I think the officers acknowledged that in the report that it will in no way compensate for the loss of trees and the habitat. So I cannot support this.
Thank you. Well, I'm very concerned about this. Policy, one of our new policies, HER1, is heritage assets, and it says that one of the policies is our supporting information is locally significant historic parks and gardens and other locally important heritage landscapes. Well, I would say this is a heritage landscape. It used to be where Poynton Towers was, where Lord Vernon lived. It was a park, and it's always been a park for everybody to enjoy. And the pool has never risen any higher. It's always kept at a decent level. And I think if we put another overflow in, it would help that. And the vegetation, as I said, putting willow whips in around the edge will stabilise it, help it build up and keep the water in. We've done that down the River Bollin in the cars and all around there, and it's worked wonderfully. And it looks nice as well, not all concrete, which just fits in with the local habitat. And when I went on the site visit, I walked along that path, and there was wooden anemones, there was celandines, there's marsh marigolds in the pool, and there's violets. It was lovely, and it's all part of our heritage. And we should be looking after that, not destroying it. And I'm sure there's way round of trying to make it better for everybody, and to put the trees in, to mitigate the trees in Woodford. I think it's wrong. It should be near the park if it does actually come to that. And as I said, plant them along the side of the road on the opposite side. That will help mitigate it all. So I'm voting for deferment. I think that's
Thank you, Chair. I kept my powder dry so far. All my questions have been answered, and most of them haven't been answered satisfactorily. I don't believe there's a case for, and I don't believe there's a case being made against by residents. We need a further debate, and I would be supporting a deferral because I can't make a decision.
Final contribution, and then I will be coming back to Councillor Gardner and then back to the officers for any final comments before we move to the vote. So, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have listened very carefully to what's been said, but we are faced with a decision that we are not taking. And I do not see, personally, any hope of actually resolving the significant differences that are between us, which is about prioritising the environment and looking at other alternatives which have been considered in some detail, considered suitable either in terms of the cost in some cases or in appropriate amelioration of the difficulties that we're facing over I'm going to call it the dam. In others, I fully accept the difficult decisions that we are taking, but we must take the overall responsibility of our council into account here for the long-term safety, not only of, I mean, I have to say I was a bit concerned when I heard that, you know, the prospect of people dying as a result of an overflow. Yes, I understand, but it's a very serious matter, and the consequent damage of any such event would be, you know, very, very serious indeed. And if we do not look at very, very carefully, as we've done, I think, at the various options and choose one which will ensure the safety of that dam, and in my view, you see, actually protects the environment. Imagine if in 10 years' time somebody comes along and says, "Oh, we're very sorry, but this has reached a stage now where we're going to have to deconstruct, or you, Cheshire East, we're going to have to deconstruct the dam and rebuild it." Now, imagine that. That would be absolutely devastating to the whole area. So, I look on the risks in it, I have to say, in a completely differently balanced way. And what I see here is a sensible way forward which protects the environment overall. Yes, it does involve the removal of some trees. But, yes, some, yes, I'm sorry, if I may speak, some trees, and I think on the other hand, it does ensure the safety of the dam and meets our legal obligations, which I think are very, very important and will not be solved by the deferral at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor. So if I can come back to Councillor Gardner, you moved deferral for further investigation. Can you just remind us what that further investigation would be on?
Right, so during the meeting, several speakers have raised questions about the veracity of the data. I think the data needs to be reviewed by the parties that submitted it, because it does form a document as part of the application. And it's the data that is relied on in being presented to us. I think we need to look at issues relating to the
Councillor Garland said. Yes, okay, yeah.
First of all, I did say earlier that this should happen at pace in recognition of the statutory responsibility. And second, that if we're going to do this, then we should also look at non-compliance with 22 policies to see if further mitigation can be made in those tasks as we move any changes.
You happy with that, Councillor Garland?
Yeah, I'm happy to accept those proposals, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Martin.
Just a quick comment in terms of there's reference to 22 policies and a conflict sort of thing, and that if this was any other application, we would be rejecting it. Yes, we would, but that's why we do each application on its merits and what's presented to you. That's the way. That's what you've been debating. But just to get up on 22 policies, also the weight and balance that we look at for all applications is what's before you. There's obviously conflicting views on that, which is fine. I think in terms of the reasons for deferral, the reason why I was just sort of discussing here was about, I think you touched on it lastly around sort of that third party sort of arbitrator. To me, the only way we get that is to get another panel engineer, because I think the issues over the data, there's comments from speakers about reliance on data being critical to what the decision should be and the sort of mitigation required. And there's other comments saying, well, yes, so there are some inconsistencies with that data, but you need to connect the solution to this regardless of that data is depressed and everything else you've heard today. So while we can go back to the applicants in terms of making sure that it's based on the correct data, I'm not sure about inspection of the dam quickly. Again, that's something that we can ask the question. But when we get to sort of engagement with the third parties, obviously there's been, I suppose, that remote engagement as in something submitted, it's looked at, it's discounted for all the reasons that you've heard today. So I think, Chair, it's just, there appears to be a conclusion for me, listening to what's going on here, is that you've got two conflicting opinions. Arguably, the town council did get a third opinion previously, they didn't like it, and that's why you've got some comments today. The additional engineer that they appointed. So it feels like we need to, again, there is sort of trying to sort of get somebody else independent of this, and that's what you're seeking, I believe. My concern is in terms of that third party, there's a limited pool, if you like, of talent in terms of knowledge around this, which we can refer to. So, that's sort of looking at another panel engineer to look at this. So I just wanted to just test that with members, is that, because my concern otherwise is what we will bring back might not give you the reassurance that, for those that express concern.
I think members are seeking to have the inconsistencies resolved, really. Did you want to answer that, Councillor Garland?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to resolve the inconsistencies in data, and even our own agent accepted that there were areas of data where he was relying on other people's information. Clearly, it's pertinent to know that actually what he's saying is correct and has been it's been challenged, and therefore it would be the grown-up thing to do, and I think those were the words employed by somebody else earlier today. The grown-up thing to do is to go back to that data and say, okay,
Chair. Just again, just really a point of clarification. Just to clarify in terms of inspecting the dam, so it's obviously been inspected by an inspecting engineer, by a supervising engineer. Are we talking about a general walk-over inspection or ground investigations? Because that's the point that's been raised by the ground investigation should be carried out to understand more at this point in time. The layout of the dam, how it's constructed, and what material is actually underneath it.
No, what there appeared to be was a lack of information pertaining to any, apart from the height of the dam. My recollection is that even our own agent was saying, oh no, well, I've not been inspected below water level. And I think actually if there is an issue of the veracity and the safety of that dam, then there should be an inspection. If all he is saying is it's not high enough, well, then in that case I think the weight he needs to afford to the risk that he is saying is far. If the issue is that the height is insufficient and therefore it needs something on top of it to deal with that particular issue, that's the only problem, then that means the only risk is the water overflowing over the top. If the water, and therefore the number of people impacted on that is not going to be the 3,500, because we're not talking about the whole lake disappearing, the volume of water in the whole lake. If the dam itself was breached, as in it broke through, then there is a greater risk, and therefore more people are going to be impacted, and therefore the weight we give to the risk should be higher. And it's that doesn't appear to have happened. And if they don't know whether or not the dam itself is safe in technical grounds, then they can't assess how really to modify that. So if you're putting extra weight on the top of the dam at the moment, and the structure below is not safe, then you're actually creating a problem, not resolving it. And I think that's why I think some inspection of that part of the dam needs to be looked at. Because I think it has material implications to the outcome of what we're being asked to assess today. And I'm not convinced that our own expert was confident in the information that I'm not saying he disputes what he said, the outcomes. I don't believe he is confident that necessarily that is the position. So I think it needs to be done.
Sorry for the, obviously I'm going to carry these through, so I just need to know exactly what I'm looking for and exactly why. The reason for the application is obviously to raise the low spots that have been identified along the dam with this consistent crest line as curve that's going to be installed. So I'm just struggling with what, I still don't quite understand exactly what this inspection is worth to use. What are we looking for? What are we inspecting?
Right, we need to make sure that the issue is that if we are balancing risk over the risk of life being harmed, if we use the use of the word harmed, then if that is only because the identifying factor is it's not high enough, then if the construction of more of the spillways is going to be on top of the existing dam, there is a need to make sure that the current dam is safe. From what he was saying earlier on, he doesn't know that. So, and my argument is that actually if we're talking about spillage, some water coming over the top going onto the main road and going into the fields beyond, unless there is a breach in the wall of the dam itself, that will be a relatively limited amount of water. It is not the volume of the lake that's going to suddenly go down towards Poynton Brook. It's only going to be a small amount of water. Whereas if the dam itself is breached through it and a lot of water comes out, that is going to cause more harm and further damage. And I think what we have here is mixing of two things. I think we've got a risk factor of it's going to affect 3,500 residents based on the volume of water leaving the dam, and that is the total volume of water, rather than a slight overflow, which is what the raising of the dam wall would achieve. And so I think those two things need to be clarified for me to vote to have the desecration of all those trees. If that's, and I'm not clear from the answer I received today that that's the answer. And that's why I think it was referred to by other people, it was referred to by the technician from Poynton Principal, and I think it's important that we know what we're looking at. Are we looking at the only deficiency being the height, or are we saying that there is something else deficient, and that's the reason why? Because I suspect also, if the water board were to serve notice on the Cheshire East Council, and they were unable to defend that position, the case would be thrown out.
Yeah, I don't follow, because I think the whole, the application is based on that premise that the locals are being raised.
That's the checkpoint. I understand. What is happening is we are basically saying, well, we must raise the level of because in order to meet the safety levels, but we're then saying that the actual damage to everybody down the road, the risk, is for 3,500 people. Well, that's it. All the water comes out and it goes down the road. And that isn't what would happen if it just tipped over the top. Not all the water suddenly, it's like a bath. Not all the bath water doesn't come out, only the stuff that goes over the top of it.
I agree.
And while I think I accept that damage can be done, I'm saying the level of damage is probably going to be less than we've done.
But that's what the application is doing, by installing this regulated crest line. It limits that flow, so it prevents that erosion that could potentially lead to the catastrophic failure of the dam, and then lead to those flood events that affect 3,500 people. So, like I said, what I'm struggling, I don't know what's other than, I just don't know what we're expecting.
I'm not an engineer, which is why I asked the questions I asked. But the answers I received to those questions did not fill me with confidence, and I thought there was too much maybe what is in the responses rather than an agreed position. And given that we have two technical people in the room disagreeing with it, saying that there are issues that need to be addressed, until we address those issues, we do not know the basis on which this application is being put forward.
Sorry, just one more point as well. Obviously, the volume of water was mentioned quite a lot. Mr. Brown gave quite a long, detailed response in terms of it doesn't necessarily affect the potential impacts of any breach and how many number of people that it affects. I mean, is the volume of water one of those aspects of data that you want to verify? Because again, the length of time it takes to get that is the bathymetric survey that the Environment Agency have offered. So we could be down, we could be past the next section 10 by the time we get that report. So I think, again, we just need to be careful what information we're asking for because it's unlikely, it is that sort of information.
I think both of the technicians will know what they're